All right, everybody, welcome to our deep dive into the world of biology. And we're going to be talking all about biology today. It's like having your own personal bio teacher with you.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to make it easy to understand all of those super cool concepts that are sometimes a little hard to wrap your head around.
Right, and we'll be uncovering some incredible facts along the way.
Yeah.
Like, did you know that hundreds of viruses could fit inside just one bacterium?
Yeah.
And bacteria are already so tiny.
I know, it's crazy, right? We're talking a world so small, it's hard to even imagine.
It really is.
But even though they're small, they have a huge impact on us and the whole planet. So let's get started with viruses. Viruses are not cells. They're just these tiny packages of genetic material, like DNA or RNA.
Okay,
And they're all wrapped up in this protein coat called a capsid.
that's like a little sneaky ninja
Yeah, exactly.
sneaking in there.
And sometimes they even have an extra layer called an envelope,
Oh, wow.
which they kind of borrowed from the host cell's membrane, making them even harder to detect.
So they're like wearing a disguise?
Yeah, exactly like a disguise.
Hmm.
So this is where things get a little interesting. Are viruses even alive?
That's a good question.
Right. They can't reproduce on their own. They can't make their own energy. They have to hijack a host cell to do all of that.
So they're kind of like little pirates,
Yeah.
commandeering a ship
Yeah, like taking
Yeah.
over.
to get what they need.
To get what they need. And there's two ways they infect a cell. One is called a lytic infection, where the virus takes over the cell completely.
Uh-huh.
It makes the cell make tons of new viruses.
Okay.
And then eventually that cell bursts open, releasing all those new viruses.
Also, it's like a cellular explosion.
Yeah, it's a big mess. But then there's another way that they can infect a cell. It's called a lysogenic infection. And this one is even sneakier.
Okay.
So what happens is the viral DNA actually becomes part of the host cell's own DNA.
Oh, wow.
It just inserts itself right in there,
Okay.
and then it can stay there silently lurking until the conditions are right, and it gets triggered to become active again.
So it's like a ticking time bomb in there.
Exactly. It's like a ticking time bomb.
Wow. But our bodies have ways to fight back, right? Like, what about our immune system?
Her immune system is amazing.
Yeah.
It's constantly working to keep us safe from all kinds of invaders, and one of its weapons is antibodies.
Yeah.
Are these proteins that can target specific viral proteins.
So they're like little target-seeking missiles.
Yes, exactly. Like little heat-seeking missiles that are going after those viral proteins. And then we also have these cells called cytotoxic T cells,
Okay.
which are like specialized soldiers that can actually destroy infected cells.
Wow. So it's like this whole microscopic battle going on inside of us.
Yeah, there's a constant battle happening in there for sure. And some viruses are really good at dodging our immune system.
Yeah, I've heard that, like, especially RNA viruses.
Yes, RNA viruses, they're the ones that are really good at escaping. They mutate really quickly. So it's like they're constantly changing their outfit,
Oh.
so they can't be recognized.
To avoid detection.
Yeah, to avoid detection. That's why we need new flu vaccines every year.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right.
Because it's always changing.
Because it's always changing.
So the vaccine's like a wanted poster
Exactly.
with a picture of the virus so our body knows what to look for.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it.
Okay.
Now let's switch gears and talk about prokaryotes.
Okay.
These are single-celled organisms
Right.
that don't have a nucleus. They're the simplest forms of life, but they are everywhere.
So it's like the minimalist version of a cell,
Yeah,
but they still have all these amazing abilities.
they're incredible.
Okay.
So prokaryotes are split into two main domains. There's bacteria
Uh-huh.
and archaea. Archaea are really cool. They live in these super extreme environments,
Oh, wow.
like super salty lakes or boiling hot springs,
Oh, my gosh.
like places you think nothing could live,
Right.
but they thrive there.
So they're like the extremophiles of the microbial world.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I'm curious, how do prokaryotes get what they need to survive? Like,
Yeah.
energy
Yeah.
and food.
Right.
Plants, they use sunlight
Yeah.
to make food through photosynthesis. But I know bacteria don't have chloroplasts like plants do.
Well, prokaryotes have come up with all sorts of clever ways to get their energy. Some of them are autotrophs, which means they can use carbon dioxide like plants do. But they might get the energy for that process from sunlight like plants, or they might get it from chemical reactions.
So they're like little chefs whipping up their own meals using different energy sources.
Yeah, they're very resourceful. And then you have heterotrophs, which need to consume organic molecules for their carbon and energy, more like animals.
Okay.
And just like with energy, they have a whole toolbox of ways to get electrons for their metabolism.
Wow. So it's amazing how they can thrive in so many different environments.
They really are. They're incredible.
Okay, let's zoom in now and look at the structure of these cells.
Okay.
So the key difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes like us is that they don't have a membrane-bound nucleus, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So their DNA is just kind of floating around in a region called the nucleoid.
Yeah, exactly. It's not enclosed in a separate compartment.
So it's like their command center is in a separate room,
Right.
just like an open area.
Right, just kind of hanging out in the cytoplasm.
Got it. Okay, and what about their shapes?
Bacteria come in a variety of shapes. You've got cocci, which are spherical, like little tiny balls.
Okay.
Bacilli, which are rod-shaped. And then spirilla, which are spiral-shaped.
So it's like a whole microscopic world of different shapes and sizes.
Yeah, it's really cool. And sometimes their names reflect their shape.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like Staphylococcus means a cluster of grapes because they form these little bunches of round cells.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so besides the nucleoid, what other structures do prokaryotes have?
Well, they have ribosomes, which are like little protein factories.
Okay.
And they have a plasma membrane, which is a super important barrier that controls what comes in and out of the cell.
So the plasma membrane is like a gatekeeper,
Yeah, it's a very selected gatekeeper.
making sure only the right things can get in or out.
That's right. And it's not just a simple gate either. The plasma membrane is involved in all sorts of transport mechanisms. Sometimes it's passive diffusion, where things just move across the membrane
Okay.
from an area of high concentration to low concentration. But sometimes it's more like a pump. It requires energy to move molecules against their concentration gradient.
So it's like trying to push a boulder uphill.
Yeah, exactly. It takes effort. And then outside of the plasma membrane, there's another layer of protection called the bacterial envelope.
Okay.
And this includes the cell wall, which is really important because it helps prevent the bacteria from bursting.
Oh, right. Especially in environments where there's a lot of water that might want to rush into the cell.
Exactly. That's called osmosis, where water moves from an area of low solute concentration to an area of high solute concentration,
Right.
trying to even things out.
Yeah.
So the cell wall is really important for keeping those bacteria intact.
Okay. So the cell wall is kind of like a pressure vessel
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
for the bacteria. Okay. And the cell wall, I remember learning about this. The composition of the cell wall is actually one of the ways that scientists classify bacteria.
That's right.
So like some bacteria have a thick layer of peptidoglycan,
right.
which is this complex molecule that gives the cell wall its strength.
Uh-huh.
And these are called gram-positive bacteria
Yes,
because they stain purple in this special lab test called a gram stain.
exactly.
Okay. And then other bacteria have a thinner layer of peptidoglycan and an extra outer membrane.
Yes.
And those are called gram-negative.
Right.
And they stain pink.
Pink, that's right.
So even just like how they stain can tell you something about the bacteria's structure.
Yeah, it's really helpful for identifying them.
Okay, now you mentioned earlier that some bacteria have more tricks up their sleeves.
Oh, yeah, they've got lots of tricks.
Like what else?
Well, some of them have a capsule, which is a sticky layer that helps them attach to surfaces, and it can also help them evade our immune system. And then some have fimbriae, which are like tiny little hairs that help them attach to things as well.
Okay.
And then there's pili, which are longer, and they can be used for all sorts of things, like transferring genetic material.
Wait, bacteria can share genes? I thought that was something that only like more complex organisms did.
That's one of the amazing things about bacteria. They're very good at sharing genes.
Wow.
And that's just one of the many amazing things about these tiny but mighty organisms.
I can't wait to hear more about that.
Yeah.
So bacteria sharing genes. That's wild. How do they do that?
It's pretty amazing. So you're probably thinking about reproduction. How do these single-celled wonders make more of themselves? It's not quite like the complex process we see in plants and animals. Bacteria mainly reproduce through binary fission.
Binary fission. That sounds kind of intense. What is that exactly?
It's actually super simple. The bacteria basically just copies its DNA and then splits in two, creating two identical daughter cells.
So like they're cloning themselves.
Yeah, basically. And this allows them to multiply really quickly when conditions are good. But don't let that fool you into thinking bacteria are all about keeping things the same. Remember how I mentioned they can share genes? Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Wow.
They have these incredible mechanisms for genetic recombination.
So even though they don't reproduce sexually, they can still mix up their DNA.
Exactly. One way they do this is through conjugation. Some bacteria have these special little loops of DNA called plasmids that are separate from their main chromosome.
Okay.
And one of these plasmids is called the F plasmid, or the fertility factor.
Fertility factor. Does that mean it's like a bacterial love potion or something?
You could say that a bacterium with the F plasmid can form a pilus, which acts as a bridge to another bacterium.
Okay.
And then it transfers a copy of the F plasmid and sometimes even some of its chromosomal DNA to its neighbor.
Wow. So they're literally sharing genetic information with each other.
Mhm.
I wonder if they gossip and exchange recipes too. But seriously, what's the point of doing this?
It's all about adaptation and survival. Sharing genes allows bacteria to acquire new traits like antibiotic resistance.
Oh, that's why antibiotic resistance is such a problem.
Exactly. The bacteria are constantly evolving and finding ways to outsmart us.
They're like tiny little superheroes.
Right. They're very good at what they do.
Wow. Okay, so conjugation isn't the only way bacteria can mix things up genetically?
Nope. They can also take up DNA from their surroundings through a process called transformation.
So like they're scavenging for DNA scraps.
Yeah, basically. This DNA might come from other bacteria that have died and release their genetic material.
Like bacterial recycling. Nothing goes to waste.
And then there's transduction, where viruses get in on the action. Sometimes when a virus infects a bacterium, it can accidentally package up some of the bacteria's DNA and carry it to another bacterium.
So the viruses are like little delivery trucks for bacterial DNA.
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
That's crazy. It's amazing how these tiny organisms have evolved such complex mechanisms for survival.
It really is. It shows the power of natural selection and the constant drive for life to adapt and evolve. Speaking of survival, some bacteria have developed this incredible ability to withstand really extreme conditions. Have you ever heard of endospores?
Endospores, yeah, I think I've heard of them, but I don't really remember what they are.
Okay, so imagine a bacteria facing a threat, like a lack of nutrients or extreme temperatures or even harsh chemicals. Some bacteria, mostly the gram-positive ones, can form these incredibly tough, dormant structures called endospores.
So they're like going into hibernation.
Exactly. It's like they're creating this tiny, armored bunker within themselves.
Okay.
The endospore has multiple layers that protect the bacteria's DNA and essential components from damage.
Wow. So how tough are we talking here?
They're really tough. They can survive boiling water, extreme dryness radiation, even some disinfectants.
Oh my God.
And they can stay in this dormant state for years, even centuries.
So it's like they have a built-in time machine.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Then once conditions improve, the endospore can germinate and the bacteria springs back to life.
Wow, that is resilience.
It's a great example of how bacteria have adapted to survive in even the harshest environments. So now let's move on to another kingdom of life that's just as diverse and fascinating as bacteria. Let's talk about fungi.
Fungi.
Nice.
Okay, I've always been curious about fungi. They seem so different from plants and animals.
They are pretty unique.
Yeah, like they don't move around like animals, but they're not green like plants. So what exactly makes them so special?
No, fungi are eukaryotic organisms like plants and animals, which means their cells have a nucleus and other membrane-bound organelles.
Oh.
But unlike plants, they don't have chloroplasts, so they can't make their own food through photosynthesis.
So how do they get their energy?
Fungi are heterotrophs, which means they get their nutrients from other organisms.
Okay.
But here's the interesting part. They do it through absorption. They release digestive enzymes into their surroundings, breaking down organic matter, and then they absorb the resulting nutrients.
So they're kind of like external digesters.
Exactly. They pre-digest their food before they absorb it. And this makes fungi incredibly important decomposers in ecosystems. They break down dead plants and animals, recycling nutrients back into the soil.
So they're like nature's recyclers.
Yeah, they play a really important role in keeping ecosystems balanced. Now, let's talk about their structure. I know they come in all shapes and sizes, from tiny yeasts to the giant mushrooms, but what are they made of?
Yeah, I'm curious about that.
So most fungi are multicellular, and they're made up of these thread-like structures called hyphae. These hyphae branch and intertwine, forming a vast network called mycelium.
Mycelium, I've heard that word before.
Yeah, you can think of mycelium as the fungal equivalent of roots, but it spreads out in all directions, exploring its surroundings and absorbing nutrients.
So it's like this hidden network spreading through the soil or even wood, connecting everything together.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And these hyphae are surrounded by cell walls, just like plant cells. But unlike plant cell walls, which are made of cellulose, fungal cell walls are made of chitin.
Chitin. Isn't that what insect exoskeletons are made of?
That's right. It's a tough, durable material that provides structural support and protection. It's one of the things that makes fungi so successful in a variety of environments.
So they're like wearing armor?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay, so what about reproduction? I know some fungi, like mushrooms, release spores. Is that the only way they reproduce?
Actually, fungi have two main modes of reproduction. Asexual and asexual reproduction is a quick and efficient way to spread when conditions are favorable. It can happen through fragmentation, where a piece of mycelium breaks off and grows into a new individual, or through the production of spores, which are dispersed by wind, water, or animals.
So those puffs of smoke I see coming from mushrooms are actually clouds of spore.
Exactly. Those spores are incredibly resilient and can travel long distances to colonize new areas. But when conditions get tough, fungi can switch to sexual reproduction.
Interesting. Why would they switch to sexual reproduction?
Well, sexual reproduction involves the fusion of genetic material from two different individuals, which increases genetic diversity. This gives their offspring a better chance of surviving in a changing environment.
So it's like shuffling the genetic deck, creating new combinations that might be better suited to the challenges ahead.
Exactly. But how does sexual reproduction work in fungi? They don't have males and females like we do.
That's true. So how do they do it?
They have what we call mating types, which are often designated as plus and minus.
Okay.
When hyphae from compatible mating types meet, they can fuse, forming a structure called a heterokaryon.
So it's like a cellular merger bringing together two sets of genetic instructions.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Eventually, the nuclei from these two mating types fuse, creating a diploid zygote. This zygote then undergoes meiosis, a special type of cell division that produces haploid spores with a unique mix of genes from both parents.
So it's like this complex dance of fusion and division, creating new genetic possibilities.
Exactly. And then those spores are released into the environment, ready to germinate and give rise to new fungi with potentially advantageous traits.
Wow, fungi are truly amazing. They have such unique ways of living and reproducing.
They really are.
Okay, so I know there are many different types of fungi, from those that cause diseases to those we use to make bread and beer. Can you tell me more about some of the major groups of fungi?
Of course. One group you're probably familiar with is the Zygomycota, which includes common bread molds.
Wait, so that fuzzy green stuff that sometimes appears on bread is actually a fungus. I always thought it was some kind of plant.
It's actually a zygomycete. They reproduce asexually through sporangia, which are sac-like structures that produce spores. When those sporangia burst, they release clouds of spores into the air, ready to land on another unsuspecting piece of bread.
It's like they're sending out tiny paratroopers to colonize new territories.
Another important group is the Escomycota, which includes yeasts, truffles, and many plant pathogens.
Wait, truffles? Those expensive delicacies that chefs go crazy for? Those are fungi too.
Yes, truffles are the fruiting bodies of certain Escomycetes that form symbiotic relationships with tree roots.
That's so cool. It's amazing how connected everything is in nature.
It really is. So what about those plant pathogens you mentioned? Are all Escomycetes bad?
Yeah, are they all bad?
Not at all. Ascomycetes are incredibly diverse. Some are decomposers, some are beneficial symbionts, and yes, some are pathogens. But even those pathogens play a role in ecosystems. They help to control plant populations and prevent any one species from becoming too dominant.
So it's all about balance.
Exactly. Now, what about those iconic mushrooms we see popping up in forests? What group do they belong to?
Yeah, mushrooms. They're so cool.
Mushrooms belong to the Basidiomycota, a group that also includes puffballs and shelf fungi.
So those classic toadstool shapes we see in fairy tales are actually basidiomycetes.
Exactly. Those mushrooms are the fruiting bodies of the fungus, and they produce spores on specialized structures called basidia, which are located on the underside of the cap, often on those gills you see.
So each gill is like a tiny factory churning out spores.
That's a great way to think about it. And those spores are released into the air, carried by the wind, to hopefully land in a suitable spot and start a new fungal colony.
This deep dive into the world of fungi has been incredible. I never realized how diverse and important they are.
They're pretty amazing.
I'm definitely going to look at mushrooms and mold with a whole new level of respect now. But before we wrap up, I have one more question about cells. You mentioned earlier that prokaryotes don't have a membrane-bound nucleus while eukaryotes do. What's the big deal about having a nucleus?
That's a great question. The presence or absence of a nucleus is one of the defining features that distinguishes prokaryotes from eukaryotes, and it has a huge impact on how cells are organized and how they function.
So it's not just about having a separate compartment for the DNA.
Right. The nucleus is much more than just a storage container. It's like the control center of the cell, regulating gene expression and coordinating many vital cellular processes.
So it's like the brain of the cell.
That's a great analogy. The nucleus also plays a crucial role in cell division, ensuring that the DNA is accurately copied and distributed to the daughter cells.
It sounds like the nucleus is essential for complex life.
It is.
Yeah?
And its evolution was a major step in the history of life, paving the way for the incredible diversity of eukaryotic organisms we see today.
It's like all these little things that we don't even think about have had such a big impact on shaping the world we live in.
Absolutely. And you know what's even more amazing?
What?
That even with all our advanced technology, we still haven't uncovered all the secrets of biology.
Yeah, there's still so much more to learn.
So much more. And that's what makes it so exciting.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to just how complex and beautiful life is at every level.
That's great to hear. I hope it inspires you to keep learning more about these amazing organisms and processes that make life possible.
I definitely will. Maybe I'll even try to look at that mold growing on my bread a little differently now.
There you go. That's the spirit. Keep that curiosity alive and never stop exploring.
And to all our listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of biology.
Yes, thank you. We hope you've enjoyed it.
And maybe even sparked a new passion for science.
We'll see you next time.
Yeah, keep those brains buzzing.